Homelessness knows no boundaries. In some parts of the world, it's a sad fact in the lives of nations. Hundreds of thousands, even millions of people forced to move by war, invasion, by disease, by natural disaster, by the ravages of climate change. Here in the United States, there is no war. This is a country at peace. It's the most prosperous nation on earth. But there is homelessness here as well, for different reasons. Poverty, mental illness, addiction, people falling through the cracks. There are different ways of looking at this problem, different ways of solving it. An intriguing one right here in the city of Atlanta is using shipping containers to create homes in a new community called the Melody. Shipping containers are for products, not people, but these have been turned into homes, working homes, running water, a place where someone can sleep and know they're safe. And from there, they can find a path to recovery from the problems that led them to homelessness. Still, there are only a dozen places. The city hopes to build a few hundred. And at the same time, you will still see, when you drive through Atlanta, when you go under bridges or past a park, other people living in misery and in filth. Sometimes people throw them $1 or $2. Mostly people just choose to look away. The other approach is to address homelessness with the law. A recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling does exactly that, in fact. It allows communities to enforce vagrancy laws and other prohibitions against homeless people sleeping or camping out in public places. Effectively, it says there's no federal protection preventing local or state governments from deciding how best to manage their own communities, opening the door for cities to issue steep fines and even the threat of jail time to keep people from sleeping on the streets. We explore what it means for a population in the United States that needs help with not enough shelters to contain them all and really nowhere else to go. So tell me, how would you describe the situation for people who don't have homes, for the unsheltered in Atlanta? How many people are we talking about?
I think we have about 7,000 people that might
7,000
be homeless at this time.
The classic image we have of homeless people is that they are sad loners, one person, isolated from the community, isolated from their families, out there on their own, but you're working with families. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Atlanta Children's Day Shelter primarily works with families with children between the ages of 6 weeks and 6 years old, so that preschool age. We provide day services for both the parent and the child in our care. And these are holistic services, so it's not just daycare for the child, but we're talking speech therapy, behavioral and trauma therapy, occupational therapy. We do a lot of play and art therapy. So really surrounding that child with as much support as possible so that they can thrive and grow.
Now, so many organizations, so many charities, so many government agencies try to help the homeless. And success, it seems, is rare in many situations. Why is that? Why is the United States still grappling with thousands of people in every major city who have no shelter?
I think success can be measured in lots of different ways, right? So our job is to help end homelessness together. And ending homelessness is not going to end it for 100%, but we hope to end homelessness for every family that comes into our care. And the word together is really important because it takes a community to do it. It takes the government, it takes private nonprofits, it takes religious organizations and civic organizations and individuals really to rally together around this challenge and really find solutions that help families and individuals thrive and not create more barriers to recovery or self-sustainability.
It's easy to imagine that if a person has no home, you give them a home and that solves the problem.
Right.
You roll your eyes at that. Why is that?
It's a piece of the problem. So when you look at your or my life, our home is just a part of that, right? And so we need to take into account our own mental health, our self-care, our education, our employment. Inflation has had a huge effect on family self-sustainability, not just in Atlanta, but across the nation. And so, yes, finding a home is very important, but if they don't have a living wage to sustain that home and the rising costs of utilities, that's going to cause a fracture in that home life. They could lose that home, right? Childcare, a massive cost. This is why we provide 100% free services here at the Atlanta Children's Day Shelter, because if we're able to take that burden or barrier off of a family, that they can reallocate those resources to something else, then that's what we want to do.
Maybe it seems obvious, but putting a roof over a drug addict doesn't end the addiction. Putting a roof over an unemployed person doesn't give them a living wage.
Right.
Putting a roof over someone who's got physical illness doesn't heal them, and putting a roof over someone who has mental illness doesn't heal them either.
Right.
It seems like you don't end up homeless simply because you lack a house. You end up homeless because you have potentially an overlapping and cascading series of problems, and you or somebody has to deal with all of them to succeed.
Right. And I think that's where the collaborative nature comes in, right? So we pull in different specialists, trauma therapists, mental health counselors, to work with our families and our children, really to help them holistically to get to a better place.
I have the sense that this country as a whole, and this city in particular, that they're both ambivalent about homeless people. That the United States used to build a lot of public housing, and then 20 or so years ago, maybe 40 years ago, it stopped.
Right.
Atlanta used to have a lot of public housing, more than any other city, any of a comparable size, and then it tore it all down. It seems like part of this country really wants to help homeless people, and part of this country just thinks of them as an eyesore and thinks of the help that's offered, the buildings that are offered, as dirty, dangerous places for dirty, dangerous people. Do you grapple with that much?
I'm encouraged and hopeful about what's happening here around affordable housing in Atlanta. We have a city that really cares about this population. We have a mayor that is very vocal about how important this challenge is. We've got a network of nonprofit entities, government entities, religious civic entities that are really collaborating together to find solutions. So some of it is the Melody, the new housing unit downtown. We've got the Lutheran Church a few blocks down in Atlanta, that it's a City of Atlanta Lutheran church that they're using an old property that's not being used for the church anymore, and they're creating affordable housing units. We've got the City of Atlanta working on a high-rise to create new things. So I'm really hopeful about what Atlanta is doing, and excited that everybody is bringing so much affordable housing online.
It seems, again, to someone who's not involved in the work that you do, that the idea was build big warehouses for homeless people, tall skyscrapers full of homeless people, and that, for one reason or another, was judged a failure. And what seems to be working better is smaller, more personal, more intensive attention to a wide range of issues, not just give them a space and put them away.
But it's more than the space. Why did those high rises fail? Was it because that they weren't the right setting, or was it because we weren't providing the right services within that setting? So that's what the larger part of the conversation is when you look at the Melody, the new development in downtown, they have mental health workers on campus. They've got case managers on campus. So they've pulled in all of those support services to that specific facility to make sure that the success rates are higher. And so when we look at projects that might not have succeeded in the way that we had hoped, were they set up for success to begin with? We don't know, right? Like, we have to look back and really evaluate and really learn from what we have done in order to do it better.
Now, there are places around the world that cope with enormous refugee flows, where people are on the move because an entire nation is in flame, or there's some natural disaster, or there's some terrible thing that forces entire economies to collapse and people to flee just to earn a livelihood. We're not in a place like that. So the question again, should we as Americans be proud of what we're seeing when we see the homeless people on the streets and the efforts of good people like you to care for them, or should we expect more of ourselves out of this country?
I think we should always challenge ourselves to do more. What can we do better? How can we serve more? How can we serve better and provide more services? I think there are things to be proud of and where we've come over the last 20 years, but the work is not done yet, and there's just a lot more to do.
Cameron Turner, thanks so much for
Thank
this.
you so much.
Anyone traveling through the streets of America is going to see homeless people. They don't see homeless children. Where are the homeless children?
In our case, they're here at Atlanta Children's Day Shelter. We provide them a safe, nurturing environment to be in throughout the day while their parents go to work, go to school, search for employment, both, so that they can continue to learn and grow and meet their milestones despite whatever circumstances their families are facing.
What situations do you find them in? Do you find children who are runaways, who are entirely isolated on their own? Do you find them with a single parent? Do you find them with both parents?
The majority of our clients are single African American women who have become homeless as a result of domestic violence. So most of our kiddos are with single moms, and that's how they come to us, and then we help take care of the children while parents go to work.
So you have children who have endured violence in the home, the dislocation of leaving the home,
Yes.
and then the homelessness that followed.
Yes.
These are very troubled children.
Yes. We serve children from birth to the age of 5, and they have been through a significant amount of trauma by the time they've come to us. The trauma alone of just navigating homelessness is incredible. And then you add on to that a lot of times the trauma of domestic violence in addition to that. And children are resilient. And so that is wonderful for us because we're able to help them learn and grow and overcome the trauma that they've gone through.
There is a particular way of looking at the problems of homeless people and seeing them as, it's a home, it's a roof. How many of the people you serve, how many of the people we're talking about nationwide are in situations where that was not the cause? It was domestic violence, or it was addiction, or it was mental illness, or it was poverty because of unemployment. I mean, how many times is homelessness just a symptom of bigger and in some ways harder problems?
I would venture to say most of the time. I mean, I tell people all the time, I think the majority of us, me included, are just a paycheck or two away from being in the same situation as the families that we serve. Hardships can happen to anyone, and to be able to do the work that we do to help them to overcome those hardships, whatever the case may be, however they occurred, we're blessed to be able to do that.
This is the richest country in the world. It's the richest country in human history, and you're saying people like you, like us, are 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless?
Yes, it's incredible to think about, but yes, the income is definitely disproportionate and not equally spread among the nation, and certainly a concern.
Now, people don't have that attitude, and in fact, you tell me, my impression is that most people think of homeless people as a dirty annoyance, and they just want to get them out of sight. Is that your sense, and is that something you grapple with here?
That is not my sense. I think that there are a lot of different definitions of homelessness, and I think it's a misperception most of the time.
How does that complicate the effort to help these people, the effort to find the resources, the effort to find the community involvement, the effort to find the community acceptance, when the community is hostile to the people you're trying to help?
I think it's a matter of education and awareness, just imparting that on people and sharing with them, like I said, the different definitions of homelessness, the different types of homelessness, that we could be serving families who are couch surfing, who are crashing with friends and family, who are staying in hotels, who are sleeping in their cars, who are staying at a shelter. So we serve a wide variety of families facing homelessness. And education is a big part of how we inform the community, our donors, of who we serve and how we serve them.
Alison Griffith, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a very big question. Why do people in a rich place, full of jobs, full of new housing, end up homeless?
I think there's a multitude of reasons. One being, insufficient mental health services and health care. I think you would find that a large amount of people who become homeless are homeless because of health care issues. I think that it's a lack of health care in regards to substance abuse and recovery. I think there's, here in Atlanta, there is a large amount of corporate landlords who are coming in and buying up properties, sometimes sight unseen at a very fast rate, flipping them for rents that are unsustainable and unaffordable for the people who have been living in those neighborhoods forever. There's all sorts of issues that are out of the hands of a lot of people working class people who are living on the margins and can very easily end up without a home for quite a period of time. So I would say mainly the things would be insufficient and unaffordable health care, and I would also say unaffordable and unsustainable housing prices and rent prices in the Atlanta area. And of course, low-paying jobs and jobs that don't provide wages where you can live in the area where you work.
So you could be a hard-working couple even, with jobs, without major issues about health or mental illness or addiction, and still end up losing your home. Why don't people like that just get another house, get another apartment?
This is a widespread issue, so it seems like wherever you go, the same thing is happening everywhere. So the options are, you have to keep moving further and further out. We deal with residents in Forest Cove, for example, here in Atlanta, who, for no fault of their own, were paying their rents and were being managed by slumlords who, the city had to intervene and take over the property. And now a lot of these residents, again, for no fault of their own, were displaced way out of the perimeter, sometimes in Lithonia and like areas like Stone Mountain, just not within the city limits or close to Forest Cove. And you have to understand that a lot of these people don't have transportation at times. We're a society that doesn't invest in public transit, so it really makes people car dependent, and a lot of folks, were not able to keep their job because they just couldn't get to where they were working. And it's hard to find jobs sometimes, and you go without working for a small period of time and you're out of luck. There's just so many variables. I think it's not, the average American can't afford a $400 emergency, that's a problem. Like 70% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. That's a huge number, Like the vast majority of people are really very close to having something happen that's out of their control completely, that will just throw a wrench in their life and could lead to being unhoused for a period of time.
How much help do those people get? Something bad happens, are there places they can turn? Are there government agencies that will help them? Are there private agencies that they can help them? Or do they fall between the cracks with no one really noticing?
Yeah, well, going back to the healthcare issue, Georgia is one of the few states that just flat out refuses money for Medicaid expansion. And I think if we looked at it, there'd be a direct correlation between like people who are need, Medicaid, which is a service that's provided for people who are struggling and can't get it because they kind of fall between the cracks, like you say. That happens all the time, and going again in healthcare. Agencies like HUD, for example,
Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah, federal agency. They give vouchers to folks who need them to kind of help pay for their housing. And so a lot of these agencies that work with HUD, like with Forest Cove residents, once again we deal with a company called Loomis that does all the vouchers and the relocation process and all that, and they just flat out drop the ball. You can't contact them via email, you can't contact them via phone, you get the runaround, and months go by, and for no fault of the tenants, time has lapsed, and now they're facing consequences where they're going to be put out on the streets for a little while. We live in a city where there's almost 1,000 evictions a week. And
1,000 evictions a week?
Over 800 evictions a week. Yes.
And how many of those people end up homeless?
Yeah, quite a few, for sure. A large majority of them. I would say, a lot of people who do end up homeless were evicted. The systems that are in place, like eviction court and all this, they rely on algorithms now, and they rely on computers now to just kind of like have predetermined outcomes where they can't handle the amount of evictions, the 1,000 evictions a week. So what they do is they just go ahead and blanket evict most people, as opposed to taking the time to really look at what the issues are and giving the tenant a fair shot to fight the claims.
Now, there was a time when the federal government put up buildings, and there used to be a few along this stretch of road. Massive high towers full of homeless people, public housing projects. Was that a better time for those people than what they're getting now, which is the buildings are gone and the federal government is instead making it possible for them to have vouchers, which is essentially cash that they can spend if they can afford to pay a bit of rent on their own? Was that a step backwards?
I believe so. I believe in quality social housing at a large scale. We need to build and invest in social housing right now. There's plenty of places where there's plenty of vacant complexes and units out here in Atlanta. We can start addressing the issue now. Going back to healthcare, the medical center got shut down. That's terrible. The implications of that are terrible. But one thing that we can do out of that is we can turn that complex into a public social housing complex. We're tired of hearing about affordable because the AMIs keep changing and it's very opaque and vague on what's affordable and what's not. We are constantly getting, these mixed income housing where they have a couple of low income units or voucher-based units, and the rest of them are at market rate, which is just unsustainable because again the corporate landlords are coming in and just jacking up the prices. We need to invest in social housing, and that needs to happen now, and not just in Atlanta but across the country. We can pay people quality wages to build this housing, and we can house all the people that are living in the streets right now. I think you can definitely say that we have taken a step backward because you go around Atlanta and, in 2005, it didn't look quite like it looks now. And 20 years later, 2025, it's going to look, there's people living in tents all over the place. And that's not just here in Atlanta. And it's a problem that's systemic. I think it's, the nature of capitalism, but it's something that we have to contest with, and we need to fight to ensure that we have laws that protect people, and we need to start funding the services that you're talking about and the agencies that are there supposed to be a social safety net for people and just aren't there now. They're just falling straight through.
The U.S. could be doing better.
Yes, at every level. The city, the state, the federal level.
Why do you think that is, ultimately? Why do homeless people fall between the cracks?
For some reason in this country, we view being poor working poor as being an individual failure, as opposed to having these giant structural systemic issues that affect large amounts of people. We want to pin it on ourselves and say that, we have some sort of moral failing, or like there's something wrong with us inherently, when that's not the case. We are the richest country in the world. We should be able to provide a society that reflects that. And, that is what government is for. It's not a handout, This is something that we have as a social contract with each other, as a country, as a government. We should be setting a baseline for how people live. setting a floor at least, so that people can thrive and they can reach their break through their ceilings and reach their potential. But right now people are just so bogged down, again, living paycheck to paycheck. One small emergency can put you out on the streets, something that's completely out of your hands. And again, that's for the richest country in the world, spending money on lots of things. I think we can invest a little bit of that money on housing.
For a long time, municipal authorities thought it was illegal to arrest people for vagrancy. The idea that you could literally press criminal charges against people who were out in public places who had nowhere else to go, that was considered unconstitutional. It was punishing them for a crime they couldn't control because they were homeless. The Supreme Court has ruled that in fact the vagrancy laws can be enforced and that homeless people have no constitutional protection against being in public places, whatever their plight. How much does that change in the legal context affect homeless people? How much does it just change the climate of homelessness and the amount of sympathy that we as a community or as a nation feel for homeless people?
Well, again, I think it goes back to the demonization of the poor and the working poor, that there's some sort of moral failing in being unhoused, and there's not. I can tell you that it'll probably vary state to state, city to city, but I can tell you that the mayor of Atlanta, to his credit, came out and condemned the ruling. The city council claims to be the progressive city council. So I can tell you, as Housing Justice League, we are going to work tooth and nail to make sure that these rulings are not enforced in the city of Atlanta, and that it's not illegal to be unhoused. And to that end, we want to also make sure that we get the city council on record that not only will they not enforce this Supreme Court ruling and outlaw homelessness, but that they will invest in the services that we were talking about, which are, public shelters, mental health care, more social, low-income housing, and just investment in the services that we all expect to have high quality, which right now, the education system, public transit, things like that, they all down the road have an effect on your unhoused population. So we want the city to invest in those things.
Matthew Nursi, thanks for this.